On the 3rd of February 2021, the Anemo DPS Xiao was released, being the 7th limited 5-star character in Genshin Impact. Now Xiao is a bit of an interesting character, not necessarily because of his playstyle or any drama surrounding him, but more so of how much he's changed in the game's lifespan. Since his release, Hoyo has given Xiao so many things for him to work with that he's basically an entirely different character in terms of building him, team comps, and just overall power level, and today we're going to talk about that. Now obviously Xiao isn't the only character that's gone through a lot of change in Genshin. A lot of characters have received new weapons, new artifacts, and new teams. Diluc very recently got probably the biggest buff we've seen, with him being, let's be brutally honest here, a pretty bad DPS unit to becoming actually quite strong with his plunge team of Farina, Xianyun, and Bennett. We also have Xiangling, who got both the emblem artifact set as well as an amazing free-to-play weapon in the catch when Inazuma released. Fischl got a huge increase with the introduction of Dendro, with her being probably the most important character in aggregate teams, and then in 4.0 she even got a very strong signature artifact set with Golden Troop. Even the Electro Archon Raiden went from being one of the strongest on-field DPS units to be given another role at being the best Hyper Bloom enabler in the game. There are plenty of other characters that I'm not even mentioning, but out of all of them, I still believe Xiao has been the one who's been given the most things by Hoyo, and he does have a very fun and interesting story. Now before we dive into all the buffs Xiao has received over the years, I think it's important to understand why out of all characters, Xiao is the one who's receiving all this attention from Hoyoverse. Now they've obviously never spoken out about this, at least I'm not aware of it, but we can try and speculate based on his rerun timings and his in-game lore. Xiao is the sole surviving member of the 5 Yaksha, a group dispatched by Morax or Zhongli to fight and subdue demonic spirits in Liyue. Scaring away evil spirits is deeply ingrained in Chinese cultural practices as a means of protection and ensuring good fortune. In Genshin, Xiao embodies this practice as he's this folklore character who protects the people of Liyue by fighting these demons. We can see how Hoyo genuinely plays into this with how every year Xiao has been on banner in the patch Genshin run the Lantern Rite Festival, which is their in-game equivalent to Chinese or Lunar New Year. Similar to how Zhongli is the only character to ever get buffed post-release due to him being the Archon of Genshin's equivalent to China, Xiao being this important figure in Liyue representing protection from evil spirits makes him an important character in Hoyo's eyes. Now to understand how much Xiao's changed, we have to go back to the beginning of the game to what he had to work with when he first released. Xiao was in a decent spot back in 1.3, but he also didn't have much competition back then, with only Ganyu, Klee, Child, and Xiangling. He had a very good signature weapon with Primordial Jade Spear, and he had a decent team with Sucrose, Zhongli, and Bennett. Unfortunately, there was no signature artifact set that worked perfectly on him, as the Anemo Damage 1 Viridescent Venera was more of a supportive set, but he could do perfectly fine with 2-piece attack and 2-piece Anemo damage. Now, all was perfectly fine for Xiao, except there was one problem. A lot of new characters were being released around him, and nothing was really changing for Xiao. Right after Xiao released came Hu Tao, who was an absolute DPS powerhouse. All she needed was her best friend Xingqiu, and things were good to go. Hu Tao herself also got some very nice buffs in the game, with Yalan creating her new double Hydro setup, and then the Hydro Resonance changed to HP % instead of healing bonus. As players started figuring out the game more, the national team also popped up. First with Chongyun, but then later with the much stronger Sucrose variant. And then when Kazuha released, we also got international. Kazuha himself also just gave a huge boost to a lot of elemental damage dealers with his own buffing as well as his usage of the VV set, all of which Xiao could not utilize at all. With Inazuma's release, we also saw characters like Raiden and Aika who were amazing DPS units, and even older characters who were already strong like Xingqiu and Xiangling got pretty significant buffs with the emblem domain, and Xiangling specifically also got the catch. Now in this whole period, Xiao was still stuck with the same thing. He was still using 2-piece for artifacts, and his team was still Sucrose, Zhongli, and Bennett. Now while this team wasn't terrible, both Sucrose and Zhongli really just felt like placeholder characters. Sucrose is literally only in the team for Anemo particles and providing TTDS, which is honestly just the bare minimum, while Zhongli is helping with some shielding, res shred, and tenacity, which is okay. The only thing Xiao kinda received in this period, which is honestly kinda pushing it, is Staff of Homer, which is a pretty good alternative to Jade Spear on him. Now, near the end of Inazuma is when Xiao's story started to take a turn. In patch 2.7, we saw the arrival of the Chasm. Inside the Chasm area, Hoyo added a new artifact domain, and in this domain we finally received Xiao's signature artifact set, Vermillion Hereafter. Now, this isn't a situation either where this was just an artifact set that just happened to be good on Xiao. The effect was pretty much tailor-made for him, and at the time of release, Xiao was the only character that could make use of the 4-piece. It was unfortunately far from a perfect situation though. This artifact domain was and is still quite terrible to farm, with Echoes being a very questionable artifact set. The Echoes 4-piece effect is for some reason affected by ping, which means that high ping players like myself weren't able to utilize it properly. This combined with the fact that even on the characters that liked it, there were always alternative options like Glads, meant that you were really just in this domain for Vermillion. This obviously didn't stop a lot of dedicated Xiao mains, but in the grand scheme of things, this wasn't that amazing, but it was a step in the right direction. Once 3.0 dropped a few months later, Dendro got introduced, and a lot of things changed in the game. We had already seen very cheap teams that don't feature traditional DPSs like Sucrose National and Sucrose Taser, but once Dendro dropped, a whole bunch more of these types of teams showed up, with really low investment teams being able to easily destroy Abyss using Bloom reactions and Aggravate. Traditional hypercarries like Xiao took a step back. After all, if you could just get better performance from a team just by slapping a bunch of EM on an Electro character, why bother trying to farm unreasonable substats for your hypercarries? Luckily for Xiao though, just around the corner was another edgy Anemo boy about to make his grand appearance. In patch 3.3, the long-awaited Scaramouche, now named Wanderer, was finally released, and very similarly to Xiao, he was also an Anemo hypercarry. Now, Wanderer brought with him firstly the Desert Pavilion artifact set, which was another decent option for Xiao. Not as strong as Vermillion, but the other set in its domain makes it a lot nicer to farm. The Flower of Paradise Lost artifact set became our new best option for Bloom based teams, being best in slot for a lot of Hyper Bloom and Burgeon triggers. Well, artifacts aside, what Wanderer brought to the game, which was far more important, is the new character Faruzan. Faruzan is a 4-star support character that is designed specifically for Anemo hypercarries like Wanderer and Xiao. Her entire kit is built to buff these kinds of characters, and it was looking like an almost perfect situation for Xiao fans. Now, unfortunately, there's a common theme with Hoyo, and that is there's always a catch. They did something not so cool when they designed Faruzan, and that is at C0, Faruzan is almost unplayable. And even at higher cons, maybe at C5, she was still just decent. She didn't become this game-changing character for Xiao until she's C6. A lot of these issues boiled down to how much energy recharge Faruzan needed before her C6. Even if you stacked all the ER in the world on her, even at around 300 energy recharge, a pre-C6 Faruzan would still sometimes struggle to get her burst back in a double Anemo setup. And thanks to Hoyo again having no soft pity system on 4-star characters, it was almost impossible to C6 your Faruzan without actually wanting Wanderer or Ito, or even some constellations on them. Now, when players did end up getting C6 Faruzan, Xiao was involved into a whole new character. Faruzan at C6 becomes this buffing monster that shreds Anemo res, provides free crit damage, has a bit of grouping, has reasonable personal damage, and most importantly does not have energy issues. With a C6 Faruzan, Xiao's new best team becomes Faruzan, Bennett, and either a shielder, so Toma or Zhongli, or just more damage from an off-fielder like Yelan, Shangling, or even Kazuha. At this point, Xiao is now one of the strongest DPS units in the game, arguably better than his Anemo DPS counterpart Wanderer, and also arguably the best AoE DPS in the game, especially considering he didn't need a grouper like Kazuha. His single target was also really good when you're able to use his extra plunge collision multiplier to bonk the enemies. With Faruzan's inclusion in the game, Xiao mains were very happy with how much stronger he's become. And now all Xiao players had that C6 Faruzan to work towards to make their Xiao a really strong DPS. Well, if you thought it ended here, About half a year later, we got a new region with Fontaine. In Fontaine, Hoyo decided to start releasing characters that would work around HP changes, with characters like Linny, Neuvillette, Risley all featuring it in their kits. Because of this, in 4.0, the new artifact Marechaussee Hunter was introduced for these characters. Now either Hoyo forgot or they just wanted to torment Xiao players again, because thanks to Xiao's own HP drain when he uses his burst, this artifact set works pretty much perfectly on him. While the 2-piece effect of normal and charge attack damage is fairly useless, the 4-piece effect gives a whopping 36 crit rate, which is an absurd amount of stats. Now luckily for those players who slaved away in the Vermillion domain, Marechaussee isn't a strict upgrade, but they are very close. It's pretty much a case by case scenario depending on substats, weapons, and teams as to which one is going to be better for your Xiao. But one thing everyone can say for certain is the Marechaussee Hunter domain is by far the most efficient domain to farm for your Xiao, with Golden Troop also being an amazing artifact set for your sub DPS characters. But there's also another catch. As of 4.0, Vermillion is also now in the strong box, so you can get your Vermillion pieces without having to deal with echoes. So right now, Xiao has 2-piece that can be farmed passively. He has farming the Vermillion domain if you for some reason want echoes. You have Desert Pavilion if you're trying to build your bloom teams. You have strong boxing Vermillion, and you have farming Marechaussee. There's honestly so many options with Xiao in terms of artifact farming at this point that it probably drove a few Xiao mains completely mad. Okay, so Xiao has received so many things that honestly I think Xiao players were very satisfied with where he was in the game. He has an amazing team now with Faruzan and Bennett, and he has so many different options for farming artifacts that everyone can be satisfied. There's no way he gets even more, right? In 4.2, the Hydro Archon Furina was released, and she was a very strong character. Furina was obviously not a Xiao specific support, but she was basically a best in slot support for almost every character as long as the team you put her in could fully utilize her kit. Her skill featured insane personal damage that could rival Yelan, and her ult provided insane buffs as long as there were big HP changes in your team. Now the way Furina worked with her own team-wide HP drain meant that to maximize her buffs, teams would need to run a team-wide healer. Xiao's best healer in the game at this point was Bennett, thanks to his really good attack buffs. But unfortunately, Bennett can be quite annoying to play with Furina because he only heals the on-fielder. It still worked, but you weren't really able to maximize Furina's fanfare. Another option for Xiao was Jean. Jean was a party-wide healer who was also animo, so she could help with some energy, and if you did have her at C4, she did provide animo res shred, which was pretty good. Because of how strong Furina is, sacrificing Bennett's buffs for Jean was honestly a competitive alternative. So now with Furina in the game, Xiao has 2 premium teams, one with Faruzan, Bennett and a flex character, and the newer one being Faruzan, Furina and Jean. At this point, Xiao was just missing one piece. He wanted someone to replace Bennett so he could go all in on this Furina team. Bennett is an amazing, almost irreplaceable character that gives a ton of attack which Xiao really likes, but he wasn't perfect. In solo Pyro, which Bennett was playing some of the time, his ER requirements can get pretty high. But more importantly, Bennett forces Xiao into Circle Impact. For a character that specializes in multi-wave AoE content, Bennett's buff being limited to one area is not helpful at all. If you were to use your Bennett burst in one place, Xiao kills the first wave of enemies. Unless the following waves keep spawning right where you put that Bennett burst, Xiao is gonna eventually have to leave this huge attack buff behind. Since Furina's buffing capabilities with a party-wide healer is honestly comparable to Bennett, and then she's also putting in work with her own personal damage, the best case scenario was for a more useful party-wide healer to release so Xiao could go all in on this Furina team. Well, somehow Xiao got exactly that in patch 4.4 with Cloud Retainer, or Xianyun. Xianyun was basically the perfect character Xiao was looking for. Firstly, she was a party-wide healer, which allows Furina to be fully utilized, but she also buffed plunge damage herself. The fact that she was Animo meant she could alleviate energy requirements for both Xiao and Faruzan, and since she was also a catalyst just like Sucrose before, she could also hold TTDS to give Xiao even more attack. Xiao, Faruzan, Furina, xianyun is now one of the strongest teams in the game, making a unit released all the way back in 1.3, comparable to the best DPS in the game right now, Neuvillette. In this team, Xiao is getting huge amounts of buffs, allowing him to destroy AoE content, and thanks to his ability to abuse collision multipliers as well as Furina's own personal damage, this team is also amazing into bosses. Now that Bennett is out of the team, buffing isn't limited to a circle and Xiao has free reign to run around the entire chamber while fully utilizing everything on the team. And finally, with Furina, this team does now have decent damage outside of Xiao's burst to finish off enemies. Over the course of more than 3 years, Xiao has come from only having 2-piece artifacts and being stuck with a team that has 2 placeholder characters to now having 3 competitive artifact sets that are all great on him and a full premium team where every team member is playing their part perfectly. I think with Xiao, Hoyo has shown us the perfect way to keep older characters relevant with so many newer ones being released constantly. Things are looking bright if they keep using this model, not only for the future of Genshin, but also their other games like Starrel and the upcoming Zenless Zone Zero. Maybe when Natlan releases later this year, I'll be able to talk about another 1.0 character and their journey to becoming great again. But for now, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys next time.